Hey, Shawnee Lions, it's Chris, and I'm with my friend Joanna, and what an awesome sermon. And full disclosure, we are like 20 minutes from you finishing your sermon, so you're probably a little bit tired. But one of the things we're doing during our restoration series is we're saying, hey, let's continue the conversation throughout the week because we believe being a church and people that value being part of God's restorative work, that returning what's broken back to God's original intent, that's actually really important, and it's going to take more than just talking about it on Sunday. And so, full disclosure, I was really excited. I gave Joanna the choice that she want to do, do you want to do your own thing or do you want to be part of the series? And I was so appreciative because she picked to be part of the series. And for me, when I think of my time in Guinea, I think so often it's just a way to accentuate how creative people can be with the gospel in such a different context. So there were some things from your sermon that really stuck out to me, and I have my notes here, so I'm going to be rude and look at my phone every now and then. But I think what I love the most is you really stepped on, you really laid out 3 steps. You didn't step on anyone. You laid out 3 steps that it takes for someone in Guinea to begin a relationship with Jesus Christ. The first one was a good relationship, an ongoing relationship with a strong Christ follower, right? You talked about there needing to be dozens of encounters. And I love that. And then there has to be something miraculous. So recap that a little bit, and then I want to talk about what that looks like in our context here.
Okay, yeah. So we would just say that in Guinea, it takes 3 things for someone to consider giving their lives to Jesus. And like you said, the first one being a long-term relationship with a true follower of Jesus. And so we look at that as being those of us who are there long-term, myself, my colleagues, other missionaries, and then also dozens and dozens and dozens of encounters with true followers of Jesus. And so when teams come out and bring people and they get to hang out with the students and do life with the students, then it's another encounter with a follower of Jesus. And then the third being the miraculous. And in our context, we would pray for dreams and visions of Jesus.
So, and I will take a break to say this, that the number of folks that I encounter in Guinea who were just absolutely surprised and amazed that we would come spend time with them, because we were not in resort centers. We were not in these really high-class places. We were among the folk in their everyday life. And for many people, especially the children, for many of the children, they were not accustomed to seeing a group of, random white folks walking down the road, and it really stuck out. And I love that because you talk about the dozens of encounters. I'm actually going to argue that it's not that different. It's a different context, and it takes a lot more work in Guinea because there's fewer resources, there's fewer people to have those ongoing relationships. I'd actually argue, though, that here it's the same thing. Someone's probably not going to come to Christ outside of a good, meaningful relationship with a Christ follower, and that's you and me, right? That's you and me, and I love how you talked about on the baseball diamond. You said sports field or something like that, but on the baseball diamonds, because that's God's favorite sport. On the baseball diamonds and throughout our community, that we need to be present, and you talk about proximity, you talk about closeness of relationship and closeness of proximity. We have to be close to them physically, we have to be close to them relationally. That's true here. Then it does take dozens of interactions, right? And a lot of times people say, Chris, how many families come to Shine Lives through Upward? I don't know. Between Upward and then other Upward and then Center Shot and then Trunk and Treat and then Fifth Quarter, between all the different things that we do to build bridges to our community, at some point they say we should give the church a chance. And that's really meaningful. Not that we're trying to get them into churchianity, but that this is a cool place to encounter Jesus. So taking that out from here, so we're building relationships with people in their natural habitats, so to speak, where they already are. And it takes dozens of interactions. But then here it also takes, now, I'll be really honest, it doesn't take necessarily the dream, right? It can, but a lot of times it just takes that supernatural moment where the Holy Spirit has already been preparing someone's heart, and they say, wait a second, I see the truth of the gospel, and I'm going to give my life to it. You talk about welcoming, creating the space in which these other things can happen. Remind us what it looks like to create that welcoming environment.
For us in Guinea, one of the biggest things we like to do is have people in our homes. For our students that we work with, that we have relationships with, we invite them into our homes for dinner. Food draws them in, English draws them in, and then we just create opportunity for gospel-centered conversations. With the church, we try to partner with them to do the eye clinics because it's a need that they have, and so it draws them into the church for the tangible need, but then the church is there to meet the spiritual need.
And one of the really neat things is that we are blessed in such a unique way where we have and resources to be able to do these things. So one of the big things that Envision does is they bring the folks and they bring the resources to be able to run some of these things. And we're blessed. We are the local church and we're able to do some of these things. So when you think of Upward, if you think about basketball, we're missing it. We're creating an excellent environment where families, all the distractions are removed and they're hearing the gospel on a regular basis. And so getting involved, and by the way, please look at things that don't happen at the church as well. There's some things that happen at the church that could happen anywhere in the community. Things like our English for Speakers of Other Language program. But there's lots of opportunities in the community to go take gospel there. And what an awesome, because you're connected to the local church. You are that connection. And so what a tremendous opportunity. Last week, we asked that you be praying for a divine appointment. And so creating those spaces through hospitality, whether inviting into our homes or inviting into just alongside for dinner, whatever that looks like, creating opportunities for the divine appointment. And I love that you didn't shy away from that. That we actually have a part to play. That yes, God is sovereign, God is in all and through all, but we still have a part to play. So you talked about 3 different things and it started with sowing. Talk about that again.
Yeah, sowing, just for us, we have to sow the seed, we have to do our part. And so for us, that's creating opportunities for relationship or to open the doors that people would want to come in, want to be a part of your life or the church. And then that gives you the opportunity to share the gospel.
Yeah. So I love that because we do that in lots of different ways, but my favorite way is to get out from here. There are so many people that they're already in, you talked about being on boards in the community. You talk about the need for, I can tell you right now, the need for fostering and adoption in our community is sky high, right? We could add 10 foster families this month and still have more need. And I can tell you right now that being able to be that presence in our community, it changes a few lives really deeply, but it changes the whole community through that as well. So you also talk about waiting. I'm terrible at waiting. So, what's our part in that? We talk about, we sow that seed and then we have to wait. And what does that look like for you?
People are so rooted and grounded in the Islam faith that we don't see a lot of people come to know the Lord, and that can be difficult. Pastors want to know, well, how many people have you seen come to know the Lord this year? I send out updates, and it's hard to never have a salvation story. And so we have to wait on God to do his part, and then also in that celebrate where we see him working. So if I have a student text me and say, hey, I'm really starting to love Jesus right now. No, he hasn't decided to follow Jesus, but I can celebrate that God's working and trust God to do his part and to show up.
Well, and that's tremendous too, because you talk about discipleship starting before salvation. I think we forget that a lot of times. And at Shining Lights Church, and one of the things we try to give language to is salvation is not a prayer. And the question we try to ask is, are we following Jesus? Right. If you're following Jesus, then you are saved, you are a disciple, you've been rescued from the result of your sin, and this is really, really important. But sometimes we say, well, have we said that prayer? Right. Well, if we wave our hands and say a certain, words in certain order, that's actually witchcraft. That's not gospel. Gospel is following. It's so movement oriented. And I love that too. You use a Francis Chan quote, and I didn't write it down fast enough, but it's probably my favorite quote. By the way, I appreciate that she brought in tremendous minds besides her own. So if you didn't see the service, we have it on YouTube. Go watch it again. We talked about when God has captured your heart, ministry will capture your schedule. That one wasn't the Francis Chan one. That was
Paul David Tripp.
Paul David Tripp. So I love that one. That ministry becomes more than just something we do. We don't go do ministry. We are constantly living a life of ministry. And so instead of being a burden or something we have to get ready for, we talked about that last week. You're never going to feel ready. Instead, it's just part of our lifestyle that we're going and giving gospel. So, one of the cool things that you get to do is you get to be embedded in a very different culture. Mm-hmm. Imagine when you come here, in the same way that some of us who went to visit you in Guinea, we experienced a little bit of culture shock, right? Are there any moments of culture shock as you come back to the States every, 20-ish months, right? Are there any moments of where you'd say, hey, for the American church, my friends at Shining Alliance, here's something to be mindful of as you go and be gospel in your community?
That's a good question. I adapt really well to everywhere I go for the most part. And one of the biggest things for me, I guess, would be it's overwhelming to go to the grocery store because I don't know where anything is and it's so big. Right. And so I think I would just say be mindful that people are coming from a completely different culture. They don't think like you think. Simple things as body language and words we use are different. And so don't be offended, and also recognize that things that you do could be offensive and be willing to have the conversations, and just know that people think differently. their priorities are different, being whether you're direct or indirect, or whether it's an honor and shame culture or something. And so all of that goes into who people are. And so especially if you're trying to reach people that are not just different from you, but from a different culture, you just get to be mindful of that and that they're different and get to know them. I think that's the best thing in Guinea is I ask the tough questions and I want to learn about the culture. And so be willing to learn about people and get to know them. Yeah.
So, and if you watch the service online, you know we titled it Creativity, and this is one of the big reasons. As a people, continue to go to the spaces you already occupy. Some of us will be called to go further. Joanna was called to go to West Africa. Tremendous, right? Some of us may be called to the similar mission field or maybe the exact same mission field. Some of us are going to be called into creative expressions of gospel here in our locality. But one of the things I also want to be mindful of, the cool thing about when we assemble as God's churches, we get to go into very intentional spaces. And some of those spaces are going to become increasingly cross-cultural. Two big reasons. One, God's bringing the nations not just to America, but to Lima. Now, I know that some of us, we struggle with this. We struggle with how our community is going to continue to look different and it's going to change. Okay, struggle. And ask what's God's desire for us in this as a church. And God's desire is for us to make disciples. So that means we'll have to be able to make those handshakes. I know that when I'm in a foreign country, I'm really appreciative when someone from that culture is able to help me understand what that culture looks like and help bring me along. So we are now the people who are called to bring folks along. So when Joanna talks about those things, when you see someone, you're not sure how to interact, listen to the Holy Spirit. I love starting conversations, and sometimes they struggle with English, and I love that because I struggle with French. I certainly struggle with French Creole. I struggle with Spanish. I struggle with most of the languages, including English sometimes. But even to just be that friendly face and to give an opportunity for divine appointment to begin sowing seed. And so let's keep being creative. You had a lot of questions, and I love when we ask questions. I think that's how we learn sometimes. So I think some of the questions that I was left with that were really important, I'd like to leave you with, and this is part of it. So when you click out of the video, you're going to have an opportunity to respond. Again, when you hit submit, we may talk about some of those on Sunday, but it helps us see where our church is and where we're going. So we love it when you fill those out. And if you put parentheses, don't talk about mine, that's fine. It still helps us because we get to see where we are as a church family. So one of those questions was, what are you doing? And specifically with sowing, right? And this is a great diagnostic question. Go through your week this week, and then as you're going to bed each night, say, in what moments was I sowing gospel seed? Right? And it might be as simple as asking our waitress before we eat our meal. Many of us pray, is there any way I can pray for you? But to be really honest, having that deep relationship with a Christ follower, my next question would be can you identify someone in your workplace, in your circles, and say, I want to plant seeds there, and that means I need to be close to them in proximity and close to them relationally, and choose to do these things. But then also, in what ways are we sowing? In other words, talk about the practical things. What are we actually doing to be able to insert a little bit of gospel? A door opening ministry is a great idea. Door opening ministry in the name of Jesus builds relationships so that we can talk about the gospel. And if they bring it first, great. And if not, we get to share the reason for the hope that we have. But then what does it look like to wait? And that can be really, really hard. That's really, really hard on me. And, I talked about that last week. But then also, what part are we taking in the harvest? I love when someone's getting baptized at Shine Alliance and they request that someone in their life who is influential in their faith be the one to baptize them. I pray for a day where we have our 20, 30, whatever baptisms, and none of our pastors are in the water because the people of Shrine Alliance Church have been so integral in people's faith development that it's not about pastors and it's not about sermons, it's not about worship sets. It's about gospel being deployed in a restorative way. Thank you for being part of all this. This is part of the deeper dive. I cut you off.
I was just going to say thanks for having me.
Well, it's always a joy. And anytime you're in the States, I hate waiting 20 months, but anytime you're in the States, we'd love to have you. And I will tell you that personally, I've been really blessed seeing Joanna in action because when she's building those relationships, she has that calm, quiet, supportive presence that creates a hospitable, welcoming environment where people can start to ask real questions about their faith. And I will tell you, one of the most beautiful and difficult things, because when I was in Guinea, I didn't always do what I was told. One of the most beautiful things was there was a space created to begin having some really good gospel conversations. We try to leave to the people who are going to be there when we leave. and people are going to be there. And I remember just having this mini crisis moment, being like, can I talk about Jesus right now? And you just look and be like, duh, of course, go for it. And getting to have this mini conversation and getting to invite one of the missionaries over to join in that conversation. Let's not wait until we're deployed. And, next week, many of us will have a little bit more time than we normally do. Maybe spend some time in prayer, but in going. My favorite part, now I do remember, was the Francis Chan quote. Why don't we default to going until we hear that voice say, hold on, stop, instead of defaulting to waiting until we hear the voice say go? And actually, I think when we read the Gospels, that is the message of Jesus, that I have called you to go, and until you hear stop, keep going, even to the difficult and dark places. Anything you'd add?
I think that's good.
That's pretty good.
Yep.
You ready to go eat some lunch and then get on the road home?
Soon, yes.
Thank you. Can't wait to see you on Sunday, and have a great week.